It's been about a week since Alterac Valley had its first major balance patch, and I can confidently say that this is the most diverse meta that Hearthstone has ever experienced in its lifetime. There are so many different viable decks ranging from Quest Rogue to Quest Druid that it really feels a little bit anxious if you are a more budget player that doesn't have a lot of dust to spend, because you don't want to like really play the weakest out of all of these decks. But luckily with this video, I'm going to show you guys not 5, but 10 different deck lists that you can climb to Legend with and maintain your rank with right now. One thing I do want to point out is that Hearthstone is going through a very weird phenomenon right now where just because a deck is really good at the diamond ranks doesn't necessarily mean that it's good at the legend ranks. And even at the legend ranks, some of those decks are not as good in the top 1000 legend metagame right now. So there's a lot of different pocket metas and a lot of different things to consider when choosing the deck up for your legend climb. So that's the reason I want to show you guys 10 outside of 5 deck lists, because there's just so many options that are available on Hearthstone right now, and I'd hate for you guys to be persuaded by the wrong list. So let me go ahead and show you guys what I believe are the 10 best decks in Alterac Valley right now. To start this list off strong, let's go ahead and talk about what is debated to be the most powerful deck in the metagame right now, and that is without a doubt Thief Rogue. Thief Rogue has the most insane possibility in the game right now of a turn 1 10-8 in stats, with having 2 Wild Paw Nulls as early as turn 1 if you get extremely lucky off of your secret passage. And that by itself is just enough to win games. Let's forget about everything else that this deck can do and just focus that Wild Paw Null is essentially a 0 mana 4/5 with Rush if you play this deck correctly. There's a lot of ways of just being able to play him as early as turn 1 through 3 with almost no drawbacks, and you can combo it with either your double agents or with other minions to give you a pretty indestructible board unless your opponent is playing a deck that has a ton of removal right now, and there's really only 1 or 2 decks on this list that even have the removal to deal with what Rogue can deal with right now. So I really do believe that this is the most strong deck because there are a ton of synergies that are possible with this list, to the point where there's another Rogue list that I'm going to include with this deck by the name of Cute Rogue, because it's essentially the same thing that Thief Tempo Rogue is trying to do, but it has a scam high roll with a gigantic Edwin possibility. Something that is important to point out is that this feels like a scam or be scammed meta right now. And what I mean by that is you either have to scam a large board, like with this deck, for example. You have to scam a ton of aggro damage with like Face Hunter or with Beast Druid, or you have to scam a game with a bunch of OTK damage as early as turns 5 through 7 with Mozaki or with Poison Rogue. So this meta is not really caring about what your opponent is developing onto the board, but board does matter to a degree. There is one other deck that's on this list that is all about removing our opponent's minions, so I can't say that, you know, the board is absolutely dead, but it just feels like a scam or be scam meta. And for this Rogue deck, everything is a scam. You have Reconnaissance in order to find you insane mana cheat, such as like a Tyrion, or in my personal opinion, one of the best rolls that I've gotten is the Ashwin, the +2 spell damage that suddenly gives like my Wand Thieves and my Prize Plunderers an insane amount of spell damage to work with my Swindles and with other randomly discovered damage cards. So there's a lot of different scams that are available with that. There's also just Scabs. Scabs by itself feels like a scam. If your opponent sets up anything, you just have the auto, you know, undo button, if you will. And the best part about the Scabs hero power is that it allows you to mana cheat out an Edwin and Mr. Smite combo. So you might even have like a large Edwin OTK or just a burst damage, if you will, in order to kill your opponent by turns like 8 through 10. Not really that common that it happens, but it is still a possibility. So this Rogue deck may have a lot of really early wins, but there's a lot of potential that this deck has to extend itself out into the late game to where it just is a powerhouse right now. So if you're looking for the best deck in Hearthstone, Thief Rogue is a good way to go. You have a lot of similarities between these two decks, so if you want my honest opinion, I do think that Thief Rogue might be just a little bit better, but if you don't have all of the cards and you want to run some Murloc Tiny Fins in a tier 1 deck, then I would say play this deck, because the huge Edwin turns can really make a big difference. The next deck that I'd like to talk about is yet another Rogue archetype, but it is about as opposite as we could be to the Tempo Rogue game plan, and that is Poison Rogue. Poison Rogue is a deck that is able to thrive so well in this meta right now because Viper is out. Viper was mostly played in order to contest most Warlock and Paladin decks, and now AAECAaIHBs has been nerfed to the point where it really isn't playable anymore, and Libram Paladin is a deck that is still around, but is not nearly as frequent on the ladder, so running a Viper just doesn't have too much going for it right now. But if you do have a Viper against a Poison Rogue, they are definitely going to feel it because it's still one of its biggest weaknesses. But the weakness isn't really being exploited right now in Top 1000 Legend, making this one of the best decks available in Top 1000 Legend. As I was saying earlier, there's a lot of different metagames throughout the various rankings, so it's really weird that Poison Rogue is one of the best decks at the top of the ladder, but then in general, Legend, it does kind of struggle, but I would still say this is a good deck to pick up if you're wanting a somewhat simple deck. This isn't the most simple deck in the world, but it does have the strategy of just mulligan for the weapon, buff it up, and try to deal the most amount of damage that you can as quickly as you can. And one other thing to point out about Poison Rogue is that Cloak of Shadows into Scabs into a whole bunch of spell damage when you already have a huge weapon equipped, it's gonna win you a lot of games. There's a lot of times where the Tempo Rogue matchup feels like it's a little bit dependent on that specific combo of being able to go for both of your cloaks into Scabs, but you still have lots of ways of being able to trade onto the board because you have the poisons to help you out with damage and with being able to be immune. So there's a lot of different things that this Poison Rogue deck can do. And one other deck that I want to highlight while we're talking about hyper-aggressive combo decks is Mozaki Mage. Mozaki Mage can do pretty much what Poison Rogue can do, except on average, I think it kills its opponent just a little bit faster, but you're more dependent on getting that one copy of your legendary. At least with Poison Rogue, you have 3-4 copies of a weapon in order to really give your consistency of your win con. But with Mozaki Mage, it's all about Incanter's Flow. Just mulligan for Incanter's Flow and for card draw, and you're going to win most of your games as early as turn 5. That's right, on turn 5, I was able to do a 70 damage combo with this deck. It is still an insanely powerful deck to where if you want to play hyper combo, these are the two decks to do it. So that's why I'm jumbling these two decks together, because as I've stated before, it's a scam or B-scam meta, and these are the two combo decks that you can scam the most consistently with. There are other combo decks out there, but these two decks just completely overshadow them in every single way. No pun intended. The next deck on this list is yet another combo deck, but I did not pair it with Mozaki Mage and Poison Rogue because this is not a hyper-aggressive combo deck. This is more of like a tempo deck first, combo last, but it's Bolner OTK Shaman. And the reason why I'm highlighting this deck over regular free Shaman is because with the nerf to Snowfall Guardian, a lot of the synergies with the old freeze list are kind of unraveling because cards like Cheaty Snowbolt just really don't work as well as they used to now that you have another mana to invest with the Snowfall Guardian. So I believe that Bolner OTK Shaman is the best way to play free Shaman right now due to the fact that you have a lot of different win cons available to you. Of course, you have your Ashiraj combo with almost infinite damage that can be a possibility in the matchups that do go that long, but let's be realistic. There's not that many games to where you're going to be able to OTK with the Ashiraj itself. A lot of your games are going to come down to your tempo and how you use your Snowfall Guardians and your Brilliant Macaws. There's a lot of different flexibility with this deck to where you can win with the Mutanus, you can win with your Percon, you could win with just straight up tempo if you have a really early Wildpaw Cavern, and you also have plenty of removal in order to fight back if you are a little bit in a rut. And with cards like Dunk Tank and Circuits Medic being the most powerful combo tools that you have in your deck in order to set up for these insane OTKs. But something else about this deck is just Wind Chill. Wind Chill is an extremely powerful card because being able to stall 1 or 2 turns is exactly what Shaman has been missing throughout most of its inception in Hearthstone. There's just been a lot of ways that Shaman has just been run over before in the past. But this list has a lot of different things going for it to where I think that this is the best way to play Shaman right now. You still have your Brilliant Macaw and your Snowfall Guardians in order to give you 4 turns of freeze if you do need it, plus everything else that's available in this deck. You still have a Viper, you still have Dungeoneer for lots of card draw. So there's a lot of things that I believe this deck has going for it, but the tech aspect of it is the main reason why I wanted to showcase it, because you have many different win cons, and right now in Hearthstone, I feel like you either need to go all in on your scam or you have to have multiple ways of dealing with the scam, and so the Bolner OTK Shaman is the latter. It's able to deal with some of these scam decks somewhat consistently, so I had to showcase it. The next deck is an archetype you guys have probably already seen a lot of, but I had to put it in this list because it feels like it has insane potential of just dominating almost every deck that it goes up against, and that is Fel Demon Hunter. Another reason why I believe this deck is particularly nutty is because of the removal options that it has in order to deal with a lot of the rogue turns that are possible. One of the most important clears in this deck is still the Talented Arcanist into Immolation Aura combo, and if you have the coin, then you can stop a lot of the 4/5 3/3 turns that the rogue can play with their Wild Paw Knolls and their double agents. So you have plenty of ways of being able to deal with those minions, plus being able to interact your own game plan is still very, very powerful. We've kind of opted towards more of a list that has a decent amount of healing and removal more than just having a combo be the main focus of the deck, because survivability is something that a lot of decks don't have access to right now, except for Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter still has the Lifesteal weapon. It still has Fellscream Blast combos with the Talented Arcanist, so you can even do a Talented Arcanist clear to kill a double agent as early as turn 2, which can really thwart a lot of Rogue's game plans. It's probably the reason why Fel Demon Hunter is a little bit higher up on this list, is because of these matchups that aren't necessarily that favored for you, but you have lots of ways of being able to win these matchups that you're going to be seeing a lot. And we'll go over the matchup spreadsheet in case you guys are wondering what specifically Fel Demon Hunter is good into. But the biggest thing to keep in mind here is just its consistency of being able to remove, deal damage, and do healing. So it's kind of a big player in the meta, in my opinion, because it can consistently draw cards. You have Mana Cheat out of Skull Gul'dan, and Kircher's Demon Render is still an insane hero card to give you that kind of swing to fight back against tempo decks if you really haven't been doing much developing onto the board. But the main reason I really wanted to put Fel Demon Hunter on this list is because there's a lot of decks in Hearthstone that are geared towards generating a large board or getting a large amount of value that your opponent then has to deal with. Fel Demon Hunter feels like it has a lot of those answers and a lot of those clears. It's not just about the Immolation Aura Talented Arcanist combo that we were talking about. It's about the consistency of its clearing, of its heals, and the fact that it has a way of killing you. Another good example of this is Quest Guff Druid. This was a deck to where, you had a lot of armor gain, you had a decent amount of clears that you could randomly discover, and you had insane 10-drop value that you could get. But it didn't have a way of killing anybody until the balance patch happened, and now suddenly we have the Guff hero that can literally kill our opponent with like 16, 24 damage if we're extremely lucky. And now Fel Demon Hunter has been known about having this insane combo with the Kurtrus, Expendable Performers, and Felfire Dreadeye combo. But the fact that this deck does have all of that and is still able to deal with Rogue right now really does give it a lot of edge in the current metagame right now. We'll go over some of the matchup statistics here in a second, but just know that Fel Demon Hunter has a lot of different win cons that are all about dealing with your opponent's answers rather than just straight up killing them every single game, so I had to recommend it for that reason. This next archetype is something that the HS Replay Twitter has been talking about non-stop, and I'm really surprised that a lot of people haven't picked up this archetype already, but it is Beast Druid. I really think that Aggro Druid is a thing of the past, and Beast Druid is probably the better way of being able to build this deck right now, and there's actually a pretty interesting Jombre list that I will go ahead and show on the screen for you guys in order to kind of understand why this is a Jombre deck and why this is still somewhat of an aggro deck. But it's all about the beasts. The reason why I think that this particular deck is better than Aggro Druid is because Oracle of Elune into Frostsaber Matriarch is an insane swing that I don't think a lot of people are giving credit towards. And I'll go ahead and show you guys my statistics with a Beast Druid. I've played about 70 games, and I've had about a 60% win rate with it because it just does what the deck is meant to do. You play a board. There's not a lot of decks that have a lot of early board clear, so if you're able to stick a early Frostwolf Kennels, then suddenly your Arbor-ups become really insane very quickly, and you have a lot of different beasts in order to synergize with discounting the Frostsaber Matriarch, as well as comboing into your Oracle of Elune. One other card that a lot of people may immediately dismiss and think it's a bad deck because it does have it in it is Shando Wildclaw. I'm going to tell you right now, this card has won me several games before because you can either copy the Park Panther if it somehow survives, you can copy the Matriarch very, very effectively, you can copy the Dire Frostwolf as well in order to give yourself two stealth minions that your opponent can't interact with, and having 4/4s with stealth that can have Arbor up attached to them, woo! Very, very good. But the rest of the deck is a little bit of beasts in order to help out with your early curve. I really think that Ram Commander is something that is completely underrepresented in the metagame right now, because I've had a lot of consistent wins where I play Ram Commander on 2, then I have the Oracle of Elune and Rush combo just ready to go in order to give my Frost Saber Matriarch insane amount of discounts. So I think that this deck might be worth running if you guys are looking for something that's not as expensive. Do you need the Shando Wildclaw? I would highly recommend it, but you could just sub it out for another Enchanted Raven, just so that way your curve is somewhat more consistent, because your turn 1 is very, very important. But I do believe that Beast Druid has one more really strong thing going for it, and that is the Heart of the Wild combo. Something that a lot of people probably think is that this card isn't good enough because it's 3 mana, buff a board that you already have to have on the field, so it feels like it's a card that you have to set up. But when you have a lot of stealth minions because of the Frostwolf Kennels, and when you're already playing a bunch of 1-drops, or if you're getting lucky off of the Vibrant Squirrel value, there's a lot of ways that Heart of the Wild can essentially feel like a different kind of Savage Roar, or just another way of buffing up your little minions to where they are now a threat. So I think that Beast Druid, if you're not looking to invest a lot of dust, is a great deck to start with, but just know that aggro decks may seem like they don't climb very well, but I still maintain a 60% win rate, even though I wasn't 100% impressed with what this deck could do. And now I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to show you guys the 3 decks that are still really good in Alterac Valley, but were still somewhat of an archetype before the new set was released. So right now we're looking at Face Hunter, Handlock, as well as Libram Paladin. These are decks that have been playable for several expansions now, and the reason why I'm showcasing them in this particular part of the video is to tell you that these decks may still be playable, but they're not nearly as powerful as they used to be in the top 1000 Legend metagame. So in Legend and in Diamond, these decks are probably still the king of their playgrounds, because there's just a lot of ways that a lot of newer players can't deal with 8/8s and with the Libram Paladin combos, to the point where if you're fighting anything that's not a meta deck, you're probably going to have an insanely good win rate if you do play these decks. But once you start hitting that Legend threshold, you're going to go up against a lot of players that are used to these archetypes, that are used to these decks, and they know how to play into them, or they know how to play around them. So I wanted to showcase these 3 decks still being playable and still being a deck that you can play to top 1000 Legend, but just know that these decks are very counterable now. The reason why this meta feels so diverse is because there are a lot of things that there's a lot of rock, paper, scissors going on right now. Libram Paladin, for example, was a deck that was really good in the first couple of days of the expansion, or of the update, I should say, after the balance patch was made, because a lot of people were trying out weird, slower Druid lists, and it's part of the reason why you're seeing Ramp Druid in the screen behind me as being like a tier 2 deck, but it's not on this list because it doesn't have nearly as much games behind it, so I can't confidently talk about how good Ramp Druid is. But Libram Paladin was really milking those kind of games, so it's probably boosted its win rate a little bit. Face Hunter was pretty decent into Rogue, but now Thief Rogue has figured out a way to easily fight back on the board to the point where the Hunter needs to have the perfect mulligan and the perfect curve in order to be really effective on the ladder. There's not a lot of Face Hunters that are beating me unless I am playing a Druid deck that is way too slow and I don't gain my armor cards. So Face Hunter is still just a really good all-around deck if you're looking to climb the lower ladder. But once you start going into like that Legend Diamond area, it's going to get a little bit difficult. And then you have Handlock. The reason why Handlock is kind of falling off a little bit is, again, because Rogue was already a matchup that it kind of struggled with, and now it's kind of geared towards this. It's geared away from combo and gone more towards the board, so now Warlock has this weird situation to where it feels like it has to run a Soul Rend, but you can't run 2 Soul Rends because suddenly it's going to make your Tamsin feel a little bit worse, and just Handlock is in a precarious situation, and it's part of the reason why I really don't believe that the Demon Seed is as detrimental to the meta as a lot of people are saying, or as detrimental to the game's health. I think that this deck is finally in a position to where it is balanced at the top of the ladder, but it is still obscenely broken whenever you play it at, like, you know, the Platinum and the Diamond ranks. So these 3 decks are all decks that you can play and probably hit Legend with, but if you commit to these decks, you may have some trouble going into Legend because a lot of seasoned players, they really know how to deal with these lists pretty well. Now let's go ahead and dive into the matchup spreadsheet so we can figure out what our favorable and unfavorable matchups are. For Thief Rogue, your main good matchups are anything that is board based or tempo based. So Beast Druid, Face Hunter, Quest Warrior, Quest Rogue, all of these decks have strategies to where they want to play early game minions, deal damage with them, and then close out the game with their win cons by having that support with the early game minions at the beginning of the game. And if you stop that, then you pretty much stop that win con, because then suddenly their win con has to pull all of the weight that the early game didn't generate. So Thief Rogue is able to just stop a lot of decks right in their tracks as early as turn 1 because of the insane high rolls available with the Wild Pawn Knoll, to the point where the only things that really can beat it are decks that have a lot of removal or a lot of healing or a lot of taunts. So what are decks that can do that? Fel Demon Hunter, Bolner OTK Shaman, Libram Paladin, and even Quest Handlock, because Quest Handlock has ways of being able to remove the 4/5s because Soul Rend is a card. So there are ways that Thief Rogue can be dealt with, and if you want my honest opinion, I have a pretty decent Warlock matchup, so I'm really not sure if this matchup is as good as it says, but it has about 1,000 games under it, so maybe I'm just a rogue god and I just don't know it yet. But Rogue really does do well against all of the tempo decks, and as long as you're not fighting a deck that has insane removal, you're going to get a lot of free wins with Thief Rogue. And on the flip side, when you look at Mozaki Mage and Poison Rogue, your board-based matchups, such as against Beast Druid and Face Hunter, are really, really bad, but your good matchups are into Fel Demon Hunter, Bolner OTK Shaman, Libram Paladin, and Quest Handlock. So we're kind of seeing like a rock, paper, scissors dynamic here, but the reason why these decks are so powerful at top 1000 Legend is just because of the matchup spreads that you're seeing at these ranks. There's a lot of people that are experimenting a lot of different things. You're seeing a lot of really weird ramp druids, like the Druid archetype right now has so many different decks available to it, to where you really can't trust anything that you see on ladder, and that's not including the Maestro Rogue being a part of it, but it does add a really wacky game dynamic sometimes. So it's really interesting that these OTK decks don't really perform that well at the lower end of the rankings, but at the top of the rankings they find their home because they know the decks that they want to beat, and they're consistently popping up. So if you're looking into these particular OTK decks, you really want to make sure that the meta that you're fighting is suitable for them. And if we look ahead, we can notice that Bolner Shaman and Fel Demon Hunter have the same weaknesses and the same strengths. Really good into Thief Rogue, pretty bad at Mozaki Mage because they can't deal with the early combo turns that are possible unless you have the Mutanus, but even then you have to have either Lightning Bloom or you have to be at 7 mana. Your Poison Rogue matchup is not that good because the weapon is just really broken, and you can probably run Viper in these decks, but I probably wouldn't recommend it. But your board-based matchups, oh my god, 74% win rate for Demon Hunter against Beast Druid, 82 against Face Hunter. Bolner Shaman kind of struggles in these matchups a little bit more than Demon Hunter does. But you notice the trend here. The only real difference between these two decks is that Fel Demon Hunter struggles with Libram Paladin because Demon Hunter's always had bad matchups with Divine Shield minions. But Bolner OTK Shaman can literally freeze the Paladin, so that's why you're seeing such a discrepancy here. So there's a little bit of differences in these two decks, but they generally have the same game plan of being able to remove and heal against the tempo decks while being able to combo against other mid-range or combo decks. And something interesting to point out about Cute Rogue is that it shares a lot of the same weaknesses and strengths as the Thief Rogue archetype. But if we look over here, we got a slight edge into the Thief Rogue matchup, probably because of the insane Edwin that we know that Thief Rogue can't deal with unless they somehow find a Devolving Missiles out of one Thief. So if you're looking for a deck that could potentially counter Thief Rogue, according to HS Replay in about 700 games, this is a somewhat favorable matchup for the Cute Rogue. So who knows? Maybe Murloc Tinyfin might be the best card in the game after all. And then running at the bottom, we have Beast Druid, where it has like the worst matchups possible against the general metagame if you see most of the decks that I'm recommending to you. But one reason why I'm still suggesting Beast Druid is because Arbor Up is still one hell of a card. And if you're fighting your way to Legend versus fighting in Legend, I feel like Beast Druid is just a deck that can get you insane amount of consistency. I was able to play this deck only in about like top 1000 Legend, and I still was able to have about a 60% win rate. And I'm probably going to make a video about this deck pretty soon in order to really talk about some of its strengths and weaknesses and why it's weird that the stats don't really reflect the experiences that I've had with this. But there's not really a lot of games, as you can clearly see here, like 39, 72, 91, 74, 92. Like there's just not a lot of data here. So when we open it up to about Diamond 4, you'll notice that Beast Druid has a significant better matchup all across the board. The Thief Rogue matchup isn't as bad now. The Mozaki Mage matchup is somewhat winnable. The Bolner OTK and the Fel Demon Hunter are still going to be your worst combo matchups because you don't want to deal with the removal. But the Poison Rogue matchup is absolutely insane. And when this deck was almost the only rogue deck that people were playing, Aggro Druid and Beast Druid was a way of beating that. So this deck does have its place in the meta. It may not be at the top of the legend ladder, but it definitely can get you to legend without a problem. And the last thing that I want to show you guys with the spreadsheet data is why Face Hunter, Libram Paladin, and Quest Handlock may not be as consistent as most people are giving it credit for. If we look at the Diamond 4 through 1, we'll notice that these decks have a lot of really good matchups all across the board. I'm not denying their strength at the lower end of the ladder. But when you look at the top 1000 ladder legend, then you'll notice that these decks have significantly more red matchups all across the board. So like the Face Hunter matchup is really only good into like a Mozaki and into Poison Rogue, while against every other tempo deck that you're seeing, it is just not keeping up. Libram Paladin is a decent way of being able to stop Fel Demon Hunter, and according to the stats, it's really good into Thief Rogue, but personally, I've played a decent amount of Thief Rogue into Paladin, and I usually beat them if I'm able to have my high roll with either Null or with the double agent, so use this with a grain of salt. I think that the Thief Rogue matchup is favored into Paladin, and Quest Handlock is only good into Thief Rogue and Cute Rogue, which is essentially the same archetype, and any Beast Druid, Aggro Druid deck because of its removal and its healing. So these decks get so much worse. They get so much worse on their way to legend, to where once you reach legend with these decks, you are probably going to peak and not get that many more wins, because these decks have finally had a way of being beaten. Like, this meta feels so fresh and it feels so diverse to where Libram Paladin, Quest Handlock, and Face Hunter cannot just be the auto go-to anymore like they used to be. I thought that Quest Handlock would be a bit better, but it's just not as fast as it used to be, and like 8/8s are cool and all, but when you have 4/5s with rushes that just stick as early as turn 1, turn 2, it's really hard to beat them up. But there you have it. There are 10 playable decks so you can not only play to legend, but you can potentially climb all the way up to the top of the ladder. I hope that this guide was somewhat informative for you guys, and if you do enjoy this kind of content, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel in order to be notified about any other future uploads I'll be happy to come out with. I love making deck guides and meta spotlights in order to show you guys what's bait, what's worth crafting, what's worth not crafting. And if you ever have any questions about the viability of any of these decks and potential cards to sub out, feel free to leave some comments down below, and I'd be happy to discuss what your grievances or what some of your worries are with crafting some of these decks. Hopefully, I was able to show you a thing or two that you weren't familiar with the new Alterac Valley meta, and we'll see you for the next video.